At some point, when you're doing all these things that you're doing, you want money. You want money to do things. We are constantly in an era where you're spending money.
Yes.
And there's a need for this, there's a need for the other. And sometimes you run short of the cash that you had and you need to top up for a reason or the other. And that's where this guy is coming, Tala, all right?
Yeah.
So Tala were, baked in a library. No, I don't know. I don't know what happened to them. But Tala started as Mkopraisi 10 years ago. So over 10 years, they've been in this market. They have understood the market very well. They understand about mobile lending. They also understand people's needs, various needs. There are those who go to them because they're running a business and they need what? Operating cash. There are those who go to them because they are in a certain level of emergency and they need to be, sorted out of their jam at that particular point. There are those who go to them because Tala is part of their monthly financial budgeting and financial mix. So I know this is my income. At this point, it comes maybe in bits. I know I'll receive this kind of payment on the second week, but I have all these needs in the first week. So I go to Tala, I take Tala loan, I pay my bills because the bills come in at the beginning of the month. So I pay my bills, and as the second payment comes from my employer, from my source, in the second week, I repay. So there are those who use Tala as part of their monthly financial planning. I don't know which one you'd be. It could be all three of them. But now what you need to do is just download Tala on Google Play. Google Play, Tala, you have it sorted. It'll sort you out. How is that?
Excellent.
So you can see the sequence.
Sure.
You can see the sequence of things. Bas. Okay. Genomic surveillance. City. So far, have you seen how genomic surveillance, for example, helped us to start saying this was patient zero for COVID-19? Or this is how COVID-19 is spreading. Let's shut down this part of Nairobi. Let's go to Kawangware and do a lot more tests in Kawangware as opposed to a lot more tests in Jericho. Why the thinking was like that?
I heard what he said.
You heard.
I'm still trying to process what he said to see if I understand it.
Daktari, then continue. For example, using the case of COVID.
Yep.
Now we know we have gone through COVID, all of us as a country.
Yes.
Now, show us how genomic surveillance was important during that time.
Very, very important. One, let's take a step back before we knew that it was COVID.
Yes.
Because COVID is the disease, and the causative agent is a virus called SARS-CoV-2. And before we knew about that, or health authorities knew about it, people were simply presenting with pneumonia and lots of fatalities initially in China. And it was a new ailment that people didn't quite understand very well. So the ability to, one, understand that this is a new novel pathogen involved genetic sequencing and genomics. So they took a few samples from the individuals, they looked at the genetic makeup, and they realized that this thing looks like something we've seen before, and that's SARS virus, which came in earlier. But it tends to happen that these are coronaviruses that are actually prevalent, a lot more prevalent in bats and in within communities. But this was a novel one. So right there is the impact and utility of genomics. The other one is our understanding.
Hold on.
All right.
Does it mean that as the researchers in the labs were then getting these samples from the patients, they also still had the other samples from the previous SARS outbreaks and they were comparing?
Yes, because this is a set of viruses that are known to cause common cold-like illnesses. And once you take the genetic makeup, you can look against a database of all pathogens that have been sequenced to date and ask the question, is this something that is already there or it's similar to what?
Have you seen it before?
Yeah, have we seen this before?
Okay.
And if you do that, then you realize that it can narrow down to a few individuals of something that has already been done before. And when it's novel, you realize that, this is something that doesn't...
There's something a bit different
absolutely
from the others.
Yes.
What would that be? For example, in the case of COVID,
Yeah.
because we have had SARS viruses before.
Yeah.
We've had, these things have been there before. What was
Bird flu.
what was the new thing about
Swine
COVID?
flu.
One, because again, on the SARS-CoV-2, looking at the genetic makeup, it was quite different in terms of you remember what we talked about the ACTGs? It was quite different. It had novel amino acids that are not in other coronaviruses, and that's why it became the novel coronavirus, if you remember.
Right.
We call it new.
Yes.
Before then, the WHO coined the term SARS-CoV-2. The 2 means is the second one.
Second
although there
version.
are like several of them.
It is new ship.
Yes. The other important thing is, and this led to a bit of a controversy. Where did it come from?
Yeah.
There was all this controversy about a lab origin.
Yeah.
There was the controversy about animal origin.
Wet markets.
And when you look at the genetic makeup again, you realize that this is not something that was baked in the lab. This is something that was already there, and there was a spillover from animal reservoirs. And you remember what I told you about other information? Again, going back and looking at how and where did the individuals that were first initially infected, where are they coming from? What did they interact with? Did they handle animals? Oh, yes, they did.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a massive market where live animals are getting sold. And do we find these viruses in these animals? Yes, we do. So it's a spillover.
Doctor, the process that we're describing here takes place in a lab. Sequencing, determining, understanding, that entire process. So if that entire process
Yes.
takes place in a lab, what is it that stops it? Now, I'm being a conspiracy theorist here, forgive me, but what stops one from tinkering? When one has the knowledge that you have, why don't I tinker with this and tinker with that and then see what happens? Because I already understand their makeup. I know what they do. Let me see now, if I make this and this, what will happen? Will they die off? Will they create a hydra? I'm simply saying...
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, that's a real concern, and
Yes.
a very important one. And that's why in research we have research ethics. And you are bound by research ethics. And there are colleagues that look at what you're doing and they can criticize positively and tell you that, looking at the data that you've provided us and what you've done, we don't think that the assumptions you're making are real. And then you go back to the drawing board. And then your aim is to convince these colleagues of yours, the peers, it's called peer review, that this is actually something that, holds water.
Or the reverse could happen, whereby at the end of the day, if we find that actually, this was not a natural thing that happened, maybe somebody actually did cook something in the lab.
Yes.
And that's why folks could actually then be on the chopping block in the future if your original information was not true, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it carries serious implications.
Yeah.
Internationally. I mean, there are laws that govern, what we do. There are laws that govern, as I mentioned, human ethics and so on. And therefore, it's very important that you get peer review and that positive criticism.
Can I ask this question?
Yeah, sure.
You see, one of the things that I have found puzzling over time is that every time there is an outbreak of sorts, for some strange reason, we always identify the areas of DRC as where it emanated from. Okay, now, if I were to look at the human-animal interactions in that region, and even the diet that involves game and wild animals, if we were to take the argument that we used regarding COVID,
Yeah.
and how it is that wet markets where there were animals and so forth, and you now take it to this setting where the human interaction with animals has to do with them eating it and perhaps not preserving them enough, or perhaps not doing whatever it is that you need to do to ensure that any pathogen that may be harmful to you is extinguished. Is there a remote possibility that indeed this occurrence that seems to be more, in my mind, than coincidental could arise simply because of the factors that I've mentioned?
Yes, that's a real concern, and indeed, eating of game, particularly if it's not prepared, in a particular way, to make it palatable, or should I use that word, or cooked? But even when it is, it's very important that to be aware that, that could be a way through which, a spillover can happen. But most spillovers will happen mostly through, contact with these, with the material. So it could be blood, it could be, respiratory. And often it involves a specific, a change within the parasite. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's look at MERS coronavirus, which is of same family, but it tends to infect camel. And it spreads among camels, but you, as an individual, as a human, you can get infected as a result of close proximity with camel.
Kissing a camel.
And and you remember we had a major outbreak. Well, I'm trying to get that picture in my mind, but it's quite funny.
And you're just thinking,
I can't avoid
not sneeze into your face.
Or sneezing onto your face.
Unless you put your face next to
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that a human can get infected, but in terms of transmission, you don't have human-to-human transmission because you've not, the virus has not made that jump, that critical mutation that is needed to then, have human-to-human transmission.
My mind is thinking, if we can have a situation where pathogens that exist in animals can affect and infect us, what about the other way around? Can we affect and infect animals as well?
Yes, we do. And if you, again, going back to COVID, there was a lot of, game sampling that happened, and indeed, other animals, cats and felines, were affected because they were getting this from humans.
Oh, we gave COVID to cats.
Yes, we did. In some instances, in limited settings, we did. So the other way can happen, which brings us to a very important thing about encroachment and wildlife conflict and climate change that is going to cause or is causing
more and more
movement of people, mobility. As climate change exacerbates, we're going to see movement of people into areas, and the other way around, of vectors or animals, disease-causing agents in areas that they initially didn't, colonize or they didn't occupy. And that's a real concern.
I imagine that when it comes to genomic surveillance, you don't wait for outbreaks. That once you've seen, for example, the common cold, you constantly keep monitoring the cold to see whether it's mutating, to see whether it's, changing in terms of how it even responds to the treatment methods that we put into it. Is that correct?
Yes, so it is very important. I think what you're talking about is doing surveillance. And we have specific studies. So, for example, in Kemri Kilifi, we carry out a lot of surveillance at multiple levels, within health facilities, within inpatient, outpatients, and, dedicated studies that are looking at particular populations. And that has been going on for a long time. And we have a very great platform for engagement with our local communities. And that ensures that, there is consistent surveillance for multiple pathogens.
Have you been able to detect something before it became a major issue? For example, through surveillance, you start noticing a change in the pathogens, that then you raise the alarm and say, this thing is starting to become a serious issue.
Yes, a lot of times. Examples, we can go back historically and look at malaria. So if you remember, there was a time, chloroquine was the drug of choice for malaria. And a lot of resistance came around. So again, looking at, the specific segments of the parasite, you can start to look at where the drug is impacting what we call pressure, or selective pressure, and therefore it making the parasite behave differently, and therefore it's able to overcome whatever drug pressure that you're giving it, and therefore it changes. But then what that does to the parasite is it puts it into sort of a corner of evolution that it doesn't want to. So when you lift the pressure, as it happened when chloroquine was discontinued, if you go back now in a lot of countries and other areas, you realize that the parasite bounced back, and now they became susceptible to chloroquine. So there is quite good genetic data that can help us in that. The other one is, again, just jumping back, and we can look at Ebola, we can look at SARS-CoV, our understanding of the so-called variants of concern, and we've also been able to pick up outbreaks, at the very early onset, simply by tracking individuals that are presenting with specific symptoms within our surveillance platforms, and able then to say, well, this is something that we think, is of concern. Yeah.
So it does make the case then for research, because sometimes we think, okay, there's a lot of things happening in the back end, and we may not see that. We won't see the results. We just know, okay, you go to hospital, you get treated, you're seen by a doctor, you make diagnosis, you get treated, you go home, you get better, right?
Yeah.
We don't see what happens in the back end.
Yeah.
But as we see all of this, then it starts to you connect the dots, and you start to understand.
Yeah.
Then why it's important to do it, and then why the call continues to be on governments to actually invest in medical research, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a very important point you brought there, because what you really want is a lot of centers of excellence, and you want government to invest in research. Our bastions and pillars of research are often universities that are hugely underfunded. If you go to any developed country, that is where basic research happens, because there are this research that happens, and this is usually the sort of the frontier pushing type of research, what we call basic research. It's not something that you're going to go to a partner and tell them, oh, by the way, I really want to understand the signaling of my particular molecule of interest. You'll be asked, and what is the impact? And if there's none, maybe they're not interested. But that can turn out to be the most important thing that you want to do. And often that type of research is driven by universities, which unfortunately there's very limited case of in this country. And I would like to call, for increased funding, particularly for universities and research, and the expansion of research centers. A lot, again, of our research is done collaboratively with our partners and also within government. But you could imagine if the government segment was expanded, not by half, not by quarter, not by a 15th. I'm just asking by a 5th. That can make a huge impact. And then we can start, moving forward.
Scale it up.
Yeah, we can scale it up.
Use funding notwithstanding, is there sufficient interest that is generated by our universities so that research is something that is understood to be at the very, very fulcrum of an institution of learning like a university? Do we have enough interest?
I think we do, and by definition, universities are intellectual places.
It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
But are they?
And that's debatable in some instances.
Yes.
But I still want to believe that at the core mandate of a university, intellectual excellence and basic research.
Citadel of knowledge.
The citadel of knowledge. That's what you want our universities to be. And you want them to, have the support, and then, we can carry out our mandate. So.
Dr. Irenji, how many people do you lead as the bioinformatics lead?
That is, so my position, cuts across the program, and supporting multiple groups, which in themselves are independent. Right. They are carrying out their specific research, across the genomic spectrum, across multiple pathogens. But then we have to have sort of, core utilities. For example, our high performance cluster, our genomics, lab platform, and then I have a lead, a small team of individuals, research officers, postdoc, and assistant research officers, technicians, to carry out, particular investigations.
Someone who's listening to this and they feel I want to learn more. I want to get interest in this. I want to end up in university or my postgrad and all, getting into this kind of research. How do they reach out to Kemri Wellcome Trust?
So Kemri Wellcome Trust runs a couple of programs, and there's an excellent platform called the Ideal Platform, and we have a dedicated training department, and they engage and onboard people at multiple levels, right from school leavers to university interns. We run together with the Pwani University a very successful program the postgraduate diploma course at Pond University. And then there are, opportunities for PhD fellowships and early postdoctoral fellowships. All these are often available through our training department and on the KEMRI website. So, and they're competitive. So, yeah.
It's good to know that we have such people in this country who've gone through, university here and who are doing all this to give back to our society. Thank you very much, Doc, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Very inspirational.
Thank you very much.
Dr. George Githinji is the bioinformatics lead at the KEMRI Wellcome Trust Research Program. He's been telling us about genomic surveillance and the importance that it plays in response to outbreaks. It's 10 a.m. We wish you a lovely day. Be good. Those who are in America, go vote. Go back home. Please maintain peace. We want to make sure that everybody is peaceful in that country. We've sent our accept the will of the people, whatever the outcome. Yeah.
We shall be sending people also to make sure.
We have our observers on ground and we are waiting for the reports from there. It's 10 a.m. Have a lovely day.